going to drop a link in the chat with that. And of course, this map that we're looking at, the green areas are where Birds of the World is free access. And this is, again, through our partnership program that has opened up these in these regions. Okay, great. If my speakers would like to put on your videos and your audio. All right, thank you. All right, so thank you, John and Alex. John Mittermeier works as the director of the Search for Lost Birds at the American Bird Conservancy. He manages the global list of lost bird species and supports projects to search for lost birds around the world. John got his PhD at the University of Oxford and has done field research on lost species in Samoa, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Madagascar, among other wild places. Hello, John.
Hi, Laura. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. And Alex Berryman is the Senior Red List Officer for BirdLife International and leads the organization's IUCN Red List Assessments for Asia. He is also a scientific associate for a Natural History Museum in the UK. Alex is the BirdLife lead for Search for Lost Birds. He has published extensively on avian taxonomy and conservation and sits on the BirdLife Taxonomic Working Group. Alex has a particular interest in the world's poorly known birds, which perhaps leads him to this interesting project. So welcome to both of you. Hi, Alex.
Hey, great to be here.
So, John, just 2 years ago, we had you on the show here introducing the Search for Lost Birds project. And during that webinar, you gave us a great introduction. I think we'll post a link to that. And we basically, through both of you working on this project, we look forward to getting a status update, seeing what's been found, seeing where we go next to help uncover some data on these birds. So feel free to start whenever you're ready. And also, we're interested in getting to know more about you and your roles at the project. So I'd love it if you also started. If I didn't hit it quite right, I'd love to know more about what you do.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. I will go ahead and share my screen here and we can get things started. All right. Can people see a title screen here? Can you give me a thumbs up in the chat, or Laura, give me a thumbs up if everyone can see it. Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the title of the talk today is going to be, as Laura said there, 4 years of the search for lost birds. The purpose of this presentation is a little bit of an update on what's been happening since we founded this initiative. And Alex and I are going to be taking turns with different sections of this. So hopefully we can manage that smoothly. I'll be managing the slides here, but bear with us as we figure that out. So to start things off, Laura, you mentioned the previous webinar that we did. Here's what it looked like. And this is, I think it was a little less than 2 years ago. But I would encourage you to watch this one as well if you're interested in this topic. This was sort of a general introduction to the search for lost birds. I talked a little bit about the conservation components of it and conservation significance. So if you're interested in that side of things, take a look at that. Today's webinar is going to be a little more focused on the list of lost birds, what we think the potential is to find other lost birds, and what's been found since this program was launched in 2021. As Laura said, I work as the director of the Search for Lost Birds at American Bird Conservancy. I've been doing that role for the last 4 years, and it was great seeing people coming with their locations and lost birds they wanted to find in the chat. Also, some familiar names there. I know it sounds like we have some people in the audience who have been directly involved in searching for and finding lost birds, so that's really exciting. Thanks you all for joining. I am in, location-wise, I'm currently in Ohio, so I saw a couple of Ohio people pop up there. Great to see you all. And if there's a lost bird that I would most want to find, it would be the Makira moorhen. And if you want to know the backstory on that, check out the last webinar. Unfortunately, I think that's a lost bird that's unlikely to be found, but it's one that is very, very close to my heart. So with that, I'm going to start out with the introduction section here. I know we talked a little bit, as I said, for those who have seen the webinar, but the previous webinar, there's going to be a bit of repeating here, but for those who haven't, hopefully this will be useful context and background. So most important thing here to start off is, what do we mean by a lost bird? What are we talking about when we say lost birds? Well, we have a very specific definition for that. Came from a paper that was published in 2022 by Barney Long and Jean Paul Rodriguez. And without having to read too much of this full definition, the key components here are what we mean when we're talking about a lost species is birds that don't have independently verifiable documentation. So that's photographic documentation, audio documentation, or genetic information in the last 10 or more years. So it's a documentation-based definition, and it has this really specific 10-year threshold. So that's what we mean when we talk about lost, when we're referring to that, and that'll be relevant throughout this presentation. Why do we think these species matter? Well, the most sort of straightforward answer to this is that updated information is really vital for conservation. And Alex is going to talk a little bit about this later in the presentation. But basically, both of us work at conservation organizations. For anyone who's involved in bird conservation, we know that it's pretty much impossible to protect a species or to design conservation strategies for it, or even to understand how threatened it is if we can't find it. So if we want to do anything for conservation of these birds, we really need updated information on them. So that's why these lost birds are a particular priority, and they're interesting to us from a conservation perspective. So Laura talked a little bit about this in the intro, but what is the Search for Lost Birds? So it's a collaborative initiative between American Bird Conservancy, BirdLife International, and Rewild. And we're very happy to work with Birds of the World, who provide content support for us. And we initially launched this program in 2021. So that was the end of 2021 was it was founded. So we're just coming up on 4 years now. And 2022 is when we launched the first Lost Birds list. So those are kind of the key dates in terms of tracking what's happened so far. What's the purpose of this collaboration? I could give you the longer sort of breakdown bullet by bullet, but really let's simplify it here. Why do we have this collaboration on the search for lost birds? We want to find all the lost birds. We basically think that there's no reason that there should be any birds that are out there that we can't get this updated information for. So we want to identify these species and do everything possible to support people finding them and getting updated information on them. A key thing to point out here, which will be relevant throughout this presentation, is that when we say find, that can mean a rediscovery. That's great. That's the best result. When someone actually finds the bird in the field and there are conservation actions that can be taken for it. But in some case, we're sort of thinking of these birds as data gaps, right? So we're thinking of them as sort of bits of information that need to be filled. I like to call them blank spots on the map sometimes, but sometimes filling that can mean determining that a species is extinct. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. Or sometimes, finding a species can be realizing that in fact it's not a valid taxon. So finding a species can both involve sort of the exciting rediscovery in the field, which might be the first thing that springs to mind, but it can also mean a determination of extinction or a taxonomic update. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex to talk a little bit about the list of lost birds.
Thanks, John. I think Laura did a very good job of my introduction, but just to, I guess, clarify a bit about what my role is. So I work here in Cambridge for BirdLife, and my job really is about working out species IUCN Red List statuses, so trying to work out what species conservation statuses are. And I suppose in that instance, lost birds offer a kind of one of the most interesting groups of species to work on, in as much as we know in some cases so little about these species. These data gaps make it at times very, very challenging to do our job and work out what a species extinction risk is. So yeah, it's a great project, and it's a lot of fun being part of this. So yeah, let's get started on my bit. So John's taken us through the definition. We first published, we published the list last year in this paper. I suspect a number of people in the audience will have seen it. It got quite a lot of media attention at the time. And yeah, this was our first attempt at collating a list of lost birds at the time that had not been documented for 10 years as of 2022. If you go next, John. So at that time, we had 142 species that we could trace no documented record for 10 or more years. So that was about 1.2% of the species that we reviewed. And they were scattered all over the world. Unsurprisingly, like bird species distributions are concentrated around the tropics, but with real hotspots here, particularly around the Democratic Republic of Congo and around New Guinea. I'll provide a slightly updated, more coarse version of this map a bit later on, and you'll see it in terms of distribution, it hasn't changed a huge amount. So we have decided since to keep this list updated. It's kind of obvious why it needs to be updated each year, I suppose. Most exciting reason to update it is that each year lost species do get rediscovered. So that's kind of the first reason. The second one is a bit more bleak. As John said, some of these species are extinct, and when they get declared extinct, we remove them from our list. I should clarify at this point, declared extinct, we follow that the IUCN Red List has listed them as extinct. And then the third one is all about this shifting time window. So yeah, John spoke about the definition, which is this 10 years of no documentation. So when the project started in 20, or when we first created the list in 2022, we were interested basically in species that hadn't been documented since 2011. We're now several years on from that, and we're now interested in species not documented since 2014. So this species on the left here, this is chestnut-shouldered goshawk, and this photo, which is awesome, was taken in 2014. So when we first ran our analysis and first produced our list of lost birds, this species didn't make the cut. But when we updated it, version 3 in 2025, it did make our list, so is now considered a lost bird. And then the fourth reason is taxonomy. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the audience here interested in taxonomy. So from its inception, the Search for Lost Birds program has considered anything a species that one or both of the Cornell Clements list or the BirdLife International list has listed as a species. So when both of these taxonomic sources stop recognizing a taxon as a valid species, it gets removed. So the illustration here, plain-backed kingfisher, is a very poorly known taxon known from 2 specimens collected in the 1940s in Indonesia. At the time, only BirdLife listed this as a species, and we stopped recognizing it a couple of years ago, so it got removed from our list. A number of you, I think it might have actually been the last Birds of the World webinar, or maybe the one before that, covering AviList, which is this effort to harmonize taxonomies. Both Cornell and BirdLife are committed to aligning. I think certainly from the BirdLife side of things, it's probably going to take us a few years. So down the road, I think we'll basically just be able to use the AviList taxonomy. But for now, at least, we'll keep our rule of using the Clements and the BirdLife list for doing so. Next. So how do we update the list? Now, I should say at this point, it's slightly ironic that I'm presenting this bit because John actually does almost all of the work, and I kind of swoop in last minute and go through the list and find things that I think might be wrong. But John pretty much does all of this. So the first job is quite straightforward, removing those species that we've declared extinct, removing those rediscoveries that no longer meet the definition. But then the much harder job is working out what species need to be added because of this moving time window and maybe changes in taxonomy. So we have to do, John does a new cut of the Macaulay Library dataset, which is what the list is kind of based off. And then we look at other citizen science datasets, iNaturalist, WikiAves, Xenocanto, also incorporating museum information about when specimens were collected, and then kind of reaching out to a wide network of experts to kind of verify that we're adding species correctly. So the original list we published in 2022. We then updated it in 2024. John, if you click next. So yeah, we updated it again in August 2024. This was version 2. Because of the paper took 2 years to get published, we actually jumped ahead 2 years in this version. So we were looking at 2014, 2023 as our 10-year window. This removed 14 species that had been rediscovered. John's going to talk a little bit about these rediscoveries in a moment. And then it added 9 newly lost. I want to give a shout out to this bird on the left here. This is unicolored thrush in all its dazzling color. Now, I forget the exact dates, but I think we published version 2 on the 12th of August, 2024, and included unicolored thrush. And I think it was 2 days after we updated that list that this photograph was taken. So it's probably the shortest lived lost bird that we'll ever have. And then the third time we updated it, version 3, so we updated it in March of this year, 8 rediscoveries, 5 species we declared extinct. 4 of those were in Hawaii. For those familiar with the conservation situation in Hawaii, you will not be surprised to hear of that. And also white-chested white-eye endemic to Australia. And then 11 newly lost, which was a little bit higher than I think John and I were originally expecting. But a lot of these came because of a big taxonomic overhaul that Cornell implemented in 2024 to align with AviList. So our plan is to keep this updated each year. I think now we're kind of on track and we have a fairly efficient way of doing it. I think we're hoping to update it as early in the year as possible. So hopefully around March next year, we will be able to publish an updated version. And as I say, I think overall we expect the number of certainly the number of rediscoveries and the number of newly lost species to kind of go down each time.
Excellent. We'll switch back to me here. Hopefully, I was getting the timing on that fairly right there, Alex. I think I missed you on 1 or 2 slides, but anyway. All right. So next, let's see. Alex alluded to a couple of these, but what's a summary if we're looking at this sort of three almost 4 years on? How many lost birds have been found in total? What's sort of our overall progress? So Alex mentioned those additions to the list that happen, as species cycle on because of changing time frames, and also, changes to taxonomy. So in total, right, as of now, there's 154 bird species that are listed on the Lost Birds website. So that means 154 birds that have qualified, that are currently considered species that have qualified as lost at some point since 2022. Alex mentioned this, 5 of those have been declared, and on the other side, 5 of these have been declared extinct, and 30 have been rediscovered. So that's, if we're using this broad definition of what we mean by a found species that I mentioned early on, that's 35 out of 154 have been found, which is about 23%, almost a quarter, which, I'll leave that to everyone in the audience to see what they think about it in terms of progress. But from my side, I think 23, 24, almost 25% is actually really impressive when you consider how difficult some of these birds are to find. Some of these things are really, really challenging. And the fact that almost a quarter of them, I'd say almost all of them are really challenging. And the fact that almost a quarter of them have been found over a 3 to 4 year time span is really impressive, and I think provides some optimism for the remaining birds looking forward, which Alex will touch on in a moment. I'll mention a few highlights here of birds that have been found last few years. We try and post updates on the Search for Lost Birds website, so we'll give a plug for that later. But if anyone wants some more background on the stories of some of these rediscoveries, check that out. But to mention here a couple of highlights, this incredible bird is the Britain Goshawk. You can see its bright orange cere, really impressive bird. This was found by Tom Viras, he was a photographer, and he posted this picture on iNaturalist, sort of saying, hey, what is this picture of a bird that I got? And the iNaturalist community, someone identified it, said, hey, this is New Britain Goshawk. It's a lost bird. This is the first photograph of it ever taken. And it had been lost for 55 years at the time that it was found. So a really cool example of the citizen science community working together to find this bird, and a bird being basically rediscovered through iNaturalist, and a pretty cool looking bird on top of it. Here's another fantastic one. This is Black-lored Waxbill. This was found by Manuel Weber in September 2023 in the Southern Democratic Republic of Congo. Again, this is the first ever photograph of this bird. It is the first time it had been documented in 73 years. It was a data deficient species, only known from a handful of specimens, extremely poorly known bird. And the fact that, all of a sudden it's found more than 7 decades later, it is really exciting and pretty amazing. Which brings us on to this bird. This is white-tailed Tityra. For those of you who are really paying close attention, Laura had an illustration of it right at the beginning of the presentation. This is phenomenal. So this bird was known from a single specimen collected in 1829. It was actually the very longest lost bird on the entire lost birds list. Almost 200 years this bird was lost. People weren't sure whether or not it was a species. Maybe it's a hybrid. Who knows? There's actually some work being done right now to clarify that for certain. But what we do know is that in September 2022, Bradley Davis got a picture of this bird in the Amazon in Brazil. So 193 years later, the longest lost bird on the list was rediscovered. Really phenomenal. And I think if you're thinking about this, like, if you guys are going through the list of lost birds at any point, having rediscoveries like this gives you hope that I think almost all of these species, it might be possible to find them. So the fact that birds like this get rediscovered really is a great source of optimism, I think, looking at these. Can we draw any patterns out of these 30 birds that have been rediscovered? So I'll leave out the 5 extinct birds now for just this analysis and think about birds that have been found, right? Are there patterns around these 30 birds that have been found in the last few years? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, by and large, birds that have been lost, birds that are found have been lost for less time. So a couple of species that are, sort of just cycled onto the list, just met that 10-year criteria, a bunch of those were rediscovered. Median years for a lost bird that's rediscovered, median years lost for a bird that's rediscovered, I should clarify, is 19, whereas median years lost overall for all the birds on the list is 48, so almost 50. So birds that are lost for less time are more likely to be found. But there's some really important exceptions to this. I already mentioned the white-tailed Tityra, the longest lost bird on the entire list has been found. Black-naped pheasant-pigeon was also lost for more than a century, as was Louis-side pitta. So by and large, birds that are lost for less time tend to be rediscovered, but that's not always true, and we shouldn't totally give up hope for these really long lost species. Is there a geographic pattern? What about geography? Is there a geographic pattern to these rediscoveries? A little bit. So, here's, if we look at this breakdown, the overall with the yellow bars are the total number of lost birds per broad geographic region. And the green fill is the number of rediscovered birds in that region. So we can see Oceania, that's Australia, and New Guinea. Alex mentioned New Guinea on that map that we saw earlier. That's one of the hotspots for lost birds. That region has more lost birds than anywhere else. I think largely because of there's not as much birding coverage there, and there's a lot of opportunities for exploration. That region also has the most rediscovered lost birds. But percentage-wise, proportionally more of the total lost birds have been found in Africa and particularly in South America. South America really stands out, where a third of all the birds on the list have been found in the last few years. So I think, if anyone here on the call is located in South America, calling in for South America, I think that really speaks to the incredible expertise of the birding community in that region and the fact that people are going out and finding these things. So really impressive. About a third of all the lost birds in South America have been found. Let's see what's possible to find the remaining ones. If you're trying to, so what's driving this geographic pattern overall? Well, I think something to be aware of, and the numbers on this particular slide are a little bit out of date, but the pattern still holds. So there's a relationship between the geography of lost birds and their threat status. So if you look at this map, red is for critically endangered birds, yellow for vulnerable, green for least concern, gray for data deficient. Without getting too caught up in the details, the thing to take away from this is that certain regions have many more critically endangered lost birds than others, whereas other regions tend to have more birds that are lost that are less threatened. Why is that important to understanding these patterns of rediscovery? Well, it's a lot harder to rediscover critically endangered or endangered lost birds than it is to rediscover least concern or near threatened lost birds. Perhaps obvious there, but important to note, I think. So this little chart shows a breakdown of the rediscovered birds by their red list status, along with the overall number of lost species. So if you look at that bar on the top, the majority of the best represented red list category on the lost birds list is critically endangered. That's not surprising. These birds are gaps, but many of them are also very threatened. Many of them might be extinct. So there are a lot of critically endangered lost birds. A very small number of those have been found, only two, in fact. Um, Whereas if you look at least concern, there are quite a few lost birds that are lost but not threatened. That means that they're probably lost because of some aspect of their behavior, their detectability, or most likely the geography of where they live. So they're in areas where there's a lot of habitat, they might not be threatened, but it's an area that's rarely visited by people or by birders, and so they're not considered, they don't get detected. So those birds, a higher proportion of them are found. Going back to this critically endangered bar, as I said, it's hard to rediscover lost birds that are critically endangered or endangered, but it does happen, crucially. This is really important. We should not give up on these species just because they're in that category. So in the last few years, we have two examples of critically endangered lost birds that were rediscovered, and hopefully there'll be some more. For those of you who have been following lost birds news, there is some recent reports of Jerdon's cursor, which is in India, which is also a critically endangered lost bird. So maybe more to come very soon on that front. All right, so those are some patterns. Also, let's think about what leads to rediscoveries. What's the relationship? What's the most frequent way that a lost bird gets rediscovered? Well, this is key. The most common way for a lost bird to get rediscovered is by an independent birder going out, or independent group of birders going out and looking for them, or local conservation groups. So this picture is Jürgen Vega. He's a birder and conservationist from the Sierra Nevada Santa Marta in Colombia. He found the Santa Marta saberwing in 2022. This is really key, this detail. Independent birders and local conservation groups are the ones finding the majority of lost birds. So I think seeing the names, some of the people on this webinar have probably been involved directly with looking for and finding lost birds themselves. Others of you may be dreaming about it or interested in it. That's great. Go for it. It's people going out and looking for these things. That is the way that they are most often found. Another key thing I'll mention here that's not quite sort of linked to this idea of rediscovery is that we're focusing on the rediscoveries. They're really exciting. They're really important. But also we should not forget the value of just doing these searches, right? If we think about lost birds as data gaps or knowledge gaps, often the birds reflect and they correlate with other types of knowledge gaps. So there's no such thing as going to look for a lost bird. If you do the project well, even if you don't find it, there are really great outcomes and positive outcomes that can come from that. One of my favorite examples of this is a project done by Sociedad Ornitológica de Córdoba, based in Colombia. You should check them out on social media and their website. They're doing incredible work. They started a project in 2021 to look for this bird here, the Sinu parakeet, which had not been documented since 1949. They did not find the Sinu parakeet, but in their searches to some of the mountains in this area, they found 22 species of birds that had not previously been recorded in that department of Colombia. They also found the first nest of crested eagle in Colombia. That's actually my Zoom background here is crested eagle, reflecting that value of the great things that can come from these searches looking for lost birds. And then out of that, through their hard work, they've turned this into the creation of a new protected area called La Cristalina Reserve. And this picture here is the SOC team at the new reserve. So really worth highlighting that as well. These rediscoveries are exciting, but there's a lot of value in just getting out there and searching. And in some ways, you never know what you're going to find. And you might find things, even if you don't find the lost bird, you might find some other really exciting things along the way and have some great conservation outcomes that come from that. So on that, we're going to transition back to Alex and talk about can we keep this going with these rediscoveries and find the remaining birds?
Thanks, John. If you go take us to the next slide. So, as I talked about previously, we updated the list this year. So previously it had 142 lost birds when we did this initially in 2022. Then version 3, which we did this year, we got that down to 126. And then since we did that update, 7 have been found. So the current sort of version 3.5, if you like, is currently at 119 lost birds. So this is the current red list breakdown. So the figures John was using was kind of from previous iterations of the list. I can already see a couple of questions about this, so I will try and explain as best I can now. So about 20% of the species listed, we currently list as least concern. I'll pause there actually. I assume most listeners are familiar with what the IUCN Red List is. For those that aren't, in brief, it's a means of classifying a species extinction risk according to various numeric thresholds. From least concern, basically species we're not too worried about going extinct, or we're not worried about going extinct, all the way up to critically endangered, those that we think are facing an extremely high risk of extinction. So currently on the breakdown of the lost birds, about 20% we currently list as least concern. Now this is sometimes a little bit surprising to people, but I can illustrate why with this example on the left here. So this is the Foger honeyeater, a species endemic to a very remote mountain range in New Guinea. It was last documented in 2008, which by coincidence was the last time any biologists got up there. They're very remote. There are no known or likely threats affecting the birds up there. And when it was last observed, it was found to be pretty common. So we infer with species like this that its current extinction risk is still low. Likewise for the species we list as near threatened. By far the biggest proportion, though, of these species, so nearly half of lost birds are listed as critically endangered. These include species we currently tag as possibly extinct. I'm going to talk a bit in a minute about how we work out whether a species should be declared extinct or not. But for some of the others, we kind of infer that if there is an extant population, it's probably likely to be very, very small. And then we have this group of 14 species that we list as data deficient. I guess these are kind of the most enigmatic bird species out there. Birds are the best known and understood taxonomic group, but there are still a few species where we currently know far too little to even try and infer their extinction risk. So on the left of these 3 illustrations, we have dewlip partridge, which is known from 8 specimens collected on Borneo between 1894 and 1902. And then you've also got species like red sea swallow illustrated in the middle here, which is known from a single specimen that was found dead at the bottom of a lighthouse in Sudan in 1984, I think, and is currently preserved as only wings and a tail. So in these instances, we really have no idea what its conservation status is, or in cases like the red sea swallow, whether it's even a valid species at all. So this is the current geographic breakdown. You'll immediately see it's rather similar to the one we had 3 years ago. So in northern North America, you have only 1 species, which is Eskimo curlew. In Europe and kind of West Asia, Central Asia, we also only have 1, which is slender-billed curlew. I'm sure we'll have some questions about those 2 species a little bit later. Then in the Americas, there's understandably a lot more around Central America and the Caribbean and South America. Similar numbers in Asia and Africa, but still, despite so many rediscoveries there, the Pacific region disproportionately has the most rediscoveries, with hotspots still around New Guinea, New Caledonia, the Bismarcks. So kind of similar patterns to 3 years ago. So the obvious question, which is the one I guess John and I get asked most frequently, is how do we get this list down to zero? It's a kind of binary question. A species is either extant and we can go and find it, or it's extinct, and shouldn't be on our list at all. So it is definitely feasible practically to get this list down from 119 to zero. Um, I kind of split it here. There's two types of resolution, even though I can't seem to be able to count from 1 to 3 correctly. But you can resolve it without a rediscovery, which is basically that we declare the species extinct, or we resolve its taxonomy, or we rediscover it. So I'm going to start with these first couple because I know this interests a lot of people in terms of how we work out whether a species is likely to be extinct or not. So are some lost birds likely to be extinct, I guess is the blunt question. So as I said earlier, lost birds doesn't consider any species that is declared extinct on the IUCN Red List. And then assessing that is the responsibility of BirdLife International as part of our role as the Red List Authority for birds. So in short, the answer to this question is almost certainly yes, some lost birds are likely to be extinct. John ran through some of the stats a bit as well. We've got 68 birds, not lost birds not seen for 50 years. We've got 15 not seen since the 1800s, and we've already got 18 that we've tagged at BirdLife as possibly extinct, and probably some more to come relatively soon on that. But it's a very, very challenging question, and it's a very challenging thing to do. So first off, it's almost impossible to prove absence, to prove that something is not there. We have to kind of infer it from various proxies. There's also very high stakes if we get it wrong. So there's two types of error you might have here. The first is arguably the graver of the two, which is where you declare a species extinct when it isn't. Now, this is problematic for several reasons. First, species listed as extinct, they're not normally covered by any protection laws. Conservation measures usually stop being applied. And for those interested, there's a very good paper by Nigel Collar on what he coined the Romeo error, which is where you declare a species prematurely extinct, and then you lose a critical window to implement conservation action and save it, then the species actually goes extinct for real. So as conservationists, we obviously desperately want to avoid that. But it's also true that we have a duty to report extinction risks accurately, and we have to spend, conservation has very finite resources, and we have to make sure we spend that money wisely, and that we're not pouring money into something that isn't there. So there is a tension between those two things. And then finally, it's also important that we're consistent. It's important that the method for working out whether a species is extinct for a species of bird is the same process in the Americas or in the Pacific. And it's also preferable, much, much more preferable, that it's consistent across taxonomic groups. So the way we're doing this for birds is the same as the way that folks are doing it for primates or cetaceans, etc. Next slide. So I've always been slightly curious where this comes from. If anyone listening knows, I'd be interested in the answer. But it's sometimes claimed that we should declare extinct any species that hasn't been seen for 50 years. Well, here are two cases, one of which John talked about why that threshold clearly doesn't work. We would have got it completely wrong for these two species that went missing for both were known from single specimens collected more than 100 and then disappeared for 170 years, and then were rediscovered in the last 5 years. So clearly, simply just using a threshold in terms of the last record isn't appropriate for trying to do this. So this is how we do it. And without wishing to go into a lot of detail, I know among some of you there will be some a bit more nerdy who will be interested in the detail, in which case I direct you towards these two papers listed in kind of small font, hopefully you can see it, at the bottom there, which go into what these two sort of modeling methods are. But in short, we basically do two modeling approaches. The first one is, I guess, the most intuitive. This is the records and surveys model. So this is looking at the pattern of records over time. So when was the species last seen? Um, and in particular, the adequacy of survey efforts since. So there is no point in us just using just using the records if no one has been to look for it since. And we see this time and time again with rediscoveries that are made almost exactly where the last record was. It's just that no one had bothered to go there before, couldn't get there. So that model is quite straightforward. We then look at this other model, which considers the threats. So for a species to have gone extinct, something must have driven it there. There must have been some kind of threat that was acute enough to drive declines and widespread enough to affect all individuals so that it went globally extinct. And each of these models spits out a number once, as I say, if you're interested in the detailed mathematics behind it, you can read these two slightly impenetrable papers. And it spits out a number that gives you an extinction probability. Now at BirdLife and IUCN, we use a threshold of if the probability of extinction is above 0.9, so a greater than 90% probability, we declare it extinct. So in terms of the lost birds, or since the start of this project in 3 or 4 years ago, we've declared 5 species extinct. Four, as I said, 4 in Hawaii, 1 in Australia. A sixth slender-billed curlew pictured on the left here will be listed as extinct from next month. This follows a paper that me and some others were involved in publishing right at the end of last year. And there's definitely more of these species to update over the next couple of years. And my plea to everyone listening is that if you have searched for a lost bird at any time and been unsuccessful, please do let us know. John and I's contact details are towards the end. But these kind of data are very, very important for using in the records and surveys model. We need to know how hard people have actually looked for something to work out whether it might still be there or not. So yeah, if we already know about it, no need to tell us again. But if you have searched for a lost bird at any time and you think we maybe won't know about it, please do get in touch because it can be incorporated into our analyses. So that was a very long-winded explanation. I'll keep the next 3 things a lot shorter. So reassessing the taxonomy. Some of you may have seen a pre-print paper published on this species on the right. I say species, it's a wing of Netchessar nightjar, known from a single wing that I think was found dangling from a fence and described as a new species, which we've recognized since. A paper not yet published, but in review, suggests that this wing is of a hybrid nightjar, shouldn't be considered a valid species. And if that's upheld, then we would take it off our list. And John and I are fairly sure there's some other species on the lost birds list that may prove with some genetic analysis to be hybrids, aberrants, and we're pretty keen to get to the bottom of those so that people aren't looking in futility for something that doesn't even really exist. And then the next 2, I'll skip over relatively quickly because I know John's going to talk in a bit more detail. Engaging the global birding community. So many of these lost birds have been found by birders just exploring their areas around them. And then these kind of more dedicated projects, engaging local and regional partners to kind of more specifically go and search for things in often quite remote places. Over to you, John.
Great. Well, that brings us to our last section here. Join the search. If you're listening to any of these things, thinking about lost birds, and you're getting excited, that's fantastic. Please, we'd love to get help and get feedback from people. And I think there are ways to get involved. The main theme here, as we've said a couple of times, is that it's really, this collaborative effort that's driving this entire process, and it's people in the field, like many of the people on this call, undoubtedly, who are rediscovering most of the lost birds. So we want to keep encouraging that and hope that it happens more in the future. Let's point out, I'd like to sort of highlight 4 specific ways to help find lost birds to help us get this list down to 0. First one is sharing photos, sound recordings, media documentation. We can include video in this. You know, we mentioned how we created the list. Alex talked a little bit about that at the beginning of the presentation. So media documented records submitted to citizen science platforms are really the basis of determining what is or is not a lost bird. So if you've contributed media in any way to eBird, to Zenocanto, to iNaturalist, to WikiAves, you have helped determine which birds are lost and which aren't, regardless of the species. So thank you for doing that. Please keep doing it. And specifically, if you have media documented records from areas where there's not as much documentation, those are super valuable and would really encourage you to get those out there. Would also, as Alex talked a little bit about this, effort, sharing information specific to the lost birds. So we have the lost birds website, we'll put a link to that at the end of the presentation. But if you have any information on any of these birds, some of that, these field searches, people often are a little hesitant to share searches that don't find the bird. I think that's understandable. You're like, well, if I find it, great. I want to talk about that. But if I went and looked and didn't find it, maybe it's a little bit harder to share that information. Please do try and share that information. You can share it directly with us, or finding ways to publish search results, even if they aren't successful in finding particular species. Those documentation of effort looking for things is super valuable. So please find ways to share that, and you can do it directly with us or through other outlets. Uh, Related to that, a lot of the lost birds, even for people who aren't as interested in going into the field, there's a lot that you can help with lost birds by just finding background data. Maybe someone, someone who happens to have a photograph of a species, or you're interested in diving into the archives and you can dig up some old records and realize like, oh, actually we've got the date for this wrong, or there's a location for it from somewhere else. All that information is really valuable. And that helps find these things and drive this program forward. Here's the obvious one. Go look for lost birds. I think a lot of people, they hear about this program, they want to get involved. Often the question is, what can I do to join an expedition or something like that? Well, as we pointed out, the vast majority of these birds are found by people sort of leading these things themselves. Independent birders who do their homework and decide like, oh, I'm going to go look for this. Local conservation organizations based in area, meaning that they have that connection to the land, they know people, they can access areas. It's local birders and independent birders going out and looking for these things that are the best way to find lost birds. So hopefully that can just be an encouragement to go out and try and find these things. And we'll finish up here with a couple of species on the list that might be particularly exciting for that. In some cases, species do require more structured searches and more structured programs. We do have a series of small grants to help support some projects. We have one grant application process out now for anyone interested. This is a partnership between ABC and Lost Birds and Ornis Birding Expeditions. If you go to the Lost Birds website or the Ornis website, you can find the application portal. This is a small grant for young birders. So anyone on the call who is 18 to 30 is interested in looking for a lost bird, submit an application. And hopefully we can help support your efforts to look for these. We're hoping to expand this a little bit more and offer some more grants in the future. So stay tuned for that if this is something you're interested in doing. And yeah, keep an eye on the Lost Birds website for any updates there. Specifically on that idea of supporting projects, we have a bunch of projects, specific project that was supported looking for certain species. So that is something that we do. So if those projects are really focused on working with locally based conservation organizations or birders. So if you live in one of the range states of these lost birds, it's a species you're connected to conservation some way, and you'd like some support, a little more expanded support to try and organize a project, please reach out directly as well, because that's something that we do have some capacity to help with. Finally, big one here, help support the program. We're completely run by mostly donations from private individuals has been the basis of supporting a lot of the grants that we give out. So another way to help is if you want to help support projects or support people looking for lost birds or help just keep this whole initiative running, please get in touch and we'd love to have some support in making this all possible. So we're near at the end here, and I just wanted to we wanted to wrap things up with kind of a fun teaser for anyone who's been a little bit inspired and interested in looking for some lost birds, if this has piqued your curiosity a little bit. This is our very back of the envelope quick hit of 10 lost birds you could find in 2 weeks or less. As we do this, we'll put the caveat, all of these lost birds are very hard to find. So it's a major accomplishment when anybody finds any of them. But some of them are likely to be easier than others. So here are 10 species that we think, if someone's keen, these might be some of the easier ones to find and and you know would be worth looking for right away. So one of these is only a monarch. This is a monarch from a single island, isolated island in Fiji that I think the bird should be pretty common on the island. It's just a question of a little bit of an adventure of how to actually get there. As far as we can tell, it was last documented in 2014. Another cool example, this is a bird from New Guinea as well, broad-billed fairy wren. If you look on eBird, there are relatively recent sightings of this species with exact locations. There's just no documentation. So this could be as straightforward as going to some of the spots where there are eBird records, bringing some sound recording gear, bringing a camera, trying to get documentation of the bird. Here's another one, Ghana cuckoo shrike. This is a bird from West Africa. I think it's a canopy species that's pretty hard to find. But again, it's definitely there. I think there are some sightings of it in places like the Thai forest in Cote d'Ivoire. This may be a question of just getting out there, dedicating a little time to looking specifically for this bird and trying to get some photos or sound recordings. 5 more for you. Black-fronted fig parrot. This one is incredible. So this is a fig parrot from recently split from northern New Guinea. Again, there's some records. There's sightings of this in eBird, but apparently no documentation. And amazingly, as far as we can tell, there's no documentation of this bird since 1910, which is pretty phenomenal considering that how many supposed sightings there are, which I think are very likely accurate. But this is one, if you're in New Guinea, if you're in Australia in the region, you're sort of excited, you want to go look for one of these species, this would be a great one to try and find. For those of us based in North America or the Caribbean, St. Kitts bullfinch, this was recently split. Last documented record of this bird was 1929 from the island of St. Kitts. This bird could be extinct, but maybe not. As far as we can tell, unless we're missing it, not that many people have really looked. And I think going back to what we talked about before, the value of searching, even if you might not find the bird. This would be a great species to just spend some time on a Caribbean island. If you live on St. Kitts, even better, you might be able to do this right in your backyard. But spend some time searching around for this species. And it's a relatively limited area. I think a lot could be done in a relatively brief and focused survey. And then the last one here, long-billed Myzomela. This is another one. This is back to our New Guinea region. This is from a couple of small islands off the eastern end of New Guinea. There are sightings of this bird as recent as 2019 from specific locations. It's just a question of getting out there, finding the bird again, getting a little more information on its status and some documentation of it. Beautiful bird. It's in the higher elevations of this mountain. It's of these mountains. So this is for someone who's keen to do a little bit of hiking and put in some work on that front. And so, if any of these birds are on this list are of interest to you, Search for Lost Birds website, we have a little bit of information on them. And then really key, we have this partnership with Birds of the World, which all of you are going to be very familiar with Birds of the World because of this webinar. And the species accounts for lost birds are open access through Birds of the World. So that's a great place to start. If you're looking at this list, you're interested in learning more about any of these birds, you're potentially interested in looking for them, check out the open access Birds of the World account. And that's really the best place to start learning more about it, as well as the Lost Birds website, and hopefully planning a search. So I think that's it for our presentation. Here's contact information for myself and for Alex. There's the URL for the Lost Birds website and a QR code for the website as well. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for the time and attention.
Wow, thank you so much, Alex and John. That was fantastic. And I almost have no questions because you answered all of them. One of my questions was, if I give you 20 grand, rucksack full of energy bars. And, where would you go first? Where would you go first?
Alex, I'll let you go first on that one.
That's a good question. I think I would probably try and tackle some of the more remote New Guinea ones.
Yeah,
Well, it depends. If it depends on whether I was motivated by a high chance of actually finding one. I think there's some with, as John said, with 2 weeks, I think you could probably do it.
yeah,
Um, there's others where it would just be fun to spend 2 weeks without sort of pressuring yourself to find something.
yeah. That's great.
I think it'd be same for me. If you said 20 grand rucksack full of energy bars, I'd definitely be headed to the New Guinea region. And
Nice.
I think, that's just so much potential there to visit sites that have less coverage. And I think, it'd be so much to discover in terms of documenting these birds. Be really fun and exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
But for 20 grand, you could have quite a good fun time on St. Kitts as well, I'd imagine. You could just put yourself up in some nice resort hotel.
No doubt. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to ask, you were just talking about, the urging people to get involved, and any one of us, if we go out in these sort of more remote areas and put some effort into it, could find it, maybe on a tour, maybe individually, maybe through one of the funded expeditions. There are some independent individuals who might have information on these birds, but were reluctant to put that media reveal its location because it's so sensitive, right? So they can then still communicate with you privately, provide this information, and then have a choice about what to do with that media. Correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, there are instances where sharing specific locations and media about a bird might cause harm to the bird or could potentially cause harm to the bird, right? Birders, we're a very excited community. If there's a bird that hasn't been seen for a century or perhaps even a decade, that suddenly you share a specific location for it, there is potential that sharing that information could
Mhm.
lead to people going to the area and causing some disturbance, or it might have, implications with local landowners or whatever. So yeah, there definitely are instances, and this has happened, where there's some need to be careful about revealing specifics about documentation or locations. Of course, we want to make sure the conservation and well-being of the birds comes first. So, there are instances where you might not want to share it, and please reach out directly in those cases.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. But otherwise, Macaulay Library is the place where this type of investigatory science is done, and we really appreciate all the media and information you can provide. Fascinating about the new Britain goshawk. How many years was that again? 100 and 70, 50?
55 for the goshawk. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great sighting as well. Great photograph. Um, a few people wanted to ask about the slender build. No, we know the slender build will be declared extinct soon, unfortunately. But the Eskimo curlew, can you just give us another status update of that? We might have missed it.
Yeah, I guess I'll tackle this one. So we currently list Eskimo curlew as critically endangered, possibly extinct. Um, we're currently running or collating all the information to run the analysis that we did for slender-billed curlew. That is currently ongoing. There's a few of us involved in that. Uh, I'm hoping that process will be done in terms of running the models end of this year, early next year.
Mhm.
The exact timeline on when we kind of get to interpreting it is a slightly open-ended question at the moment, but we're on it basically. And yeah, as soon as we published Slender Build, it was the kind of natural question that people had for us.
Yeah. I know a federal biologist is in the audience and wanted to know if there was any other advice, but really you can't give advice yet until that work is done, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so, and you were mentioning that sometimes there's grants available for expeditions, and that is through what organization again?
So ABC is doing, we have some project grants, and then it's also Ornis Birding Expeditions is this young birder lost bird grant. So that
Okay.
Ornis, ORNIS birding expeditions. Check out their website. We also have a link to it on the Search for Lost Birds website in the news
Mm,
section. So that's the application portal for that Young Birder grant. And then for other things, just get in touch directly.
right. What is the next expedition?
Well, I think, there are some things happening ongoing now, and I think it's really, I would almost ask that to the audience, right? It's because it's the birding community that's finding most of these things. So I think the what is the next expedition is kind of in a way, the question for those interested people in the audience is like, when are you going to go out and look for some of these things?
Yeah.
We do have some projects that we're supporting and continuing to support, but I think the way that these birds are found is people getting excited and going to look for them. So do it soon.
And if anybody wants to share in the chat any information that about what you're doing next or what you've done in the past, feel free to put it there and I will document that and I'll pass it on to the guys here. Let's see. So some interest in what's going on with the Makiha moorhen. Did we discuss that?
Yeah, Makira Moorhen, I mentioned that at the beginning. I think I touched, if I'm remembering correctly, I think I touched on that quite a lot in the previous webinar. That's a bird that's a flightless rail endemic to a single
Mhm,
island in the Eastern Solomon Islands. There've been a number of extensive searches for it over the last few years. It's known from a single specimen going back to 1929. And
mhm,
going back to Alex's discussion of extinction risk, I think unfortunately this is one where we know there's been a lot of survey effort and no positive records, and we have some pretty clear evidence of threats. So unfortunately, I think that's a bird that is likely extinct.
mhm. Okay. We've got a request for you to add the 2 extinction definition papers into the chat. If you have those citations, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that now.
Okay. Let's see. Can a collaboration effort be partnered in New Guinea to locate these species? So I guess that's really that's part of this desire for local groups or individuals to gather around an expedition in New Guinea to try to resolve some of those. So yes, Monique, that could definitely happen. We just need on the ground partners to really lead that.
I can jump in here. If you look at the bird so it's bottom right of my screen, directly below the QR code, this kind of blue kingfisher. That's a
Mm,
bird called Bismarck kingfisher. If you check out the Lost Birds website, the most recent news story is about the Bismarck kingfisher. So that's a bird that was lost, was just photographed and rediscovered by a researcher named John Lamaris, who is from the island of New Ireland. So he's from the Bismarck archipelago. He's from that particular region, and he was doing research there and he found this bird. So
mhm.
great collaboration, and I'm hopeful John and other people like that are going to find some more of these lost birds.
Right. So, in the areas where the lost birds have been discovered so far, have you seen any specific conservation movements?
Yes, definitely. So I think there's some in a way, so we're filling knowledge gaps, right? So there's some of these birds that are least concern. There might be a scenario where you go out and find the bird and you realize like, well, actually it's least concern and doesn't need any conservation attention. So it's not always that a bird is found that leads to a conservation effort. Um, but there are, in instances of rediscovered birds leading to conservation, there's some great examples of that where the rediscovery has been able to leverage attention and conservation action and conservation success. Conservation takes some time to work. So, it's hard to say that for a bird that's just been rediscovered, there are a number of species we're helping to support us or other groups are helping to support conservation actions. But, it's hard to say for a bird that was just found that like, yes, we're bringing it back. At a slightly longer time scale, one of my favorite examples of this is the Madagascar pochard. I think someone actually might mention this in the chat at the beginning of the presentation. This is a lost bird that was rediscovered in 2006 by a group of Malagasy ornithologists at the Peregrine Fund Madagascar. Since that rediscovery has been the focus of a conservation program, the population has increased, and it's an awesome success story and one worth checking out and learning a little bit more about.
Mm, great. So bringing attention to the birds, the project, the possibilities, not only saves that bird, right, has the potential to initiate conservation efforts for that bird, but it also uncovers a lot of data on other birds as well, especially when those complete checklists are in. Somebody did ask about an eBird thing, and I actually don't know specifically the answer on this. Somebody had asked if you go looking and really are searching for that bird and you submit an eBird checklist, can or should you put 0 for that bird? And so yeah, so Alex,
No, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. You shouldn't put. I think you're not meant to put zeros for anything. I think that's discouraged entirely now.
yeah, that's what I,
Um, so yeah, don't do that. But it's worth if you were looking for a lost bird, share with us those checklists, and kind of indicate to us that you were looking and you were in the right place and you think you were kind of
Mhm.
doing the right thing and you didn't find it.
Okay, sounds good. And remember that the emails are here on this slide. Anything new about the St. Vincent Solitaire?
Not on the list as a lost bird. So
Okay.
I think hopefully I don't know St. Vincent too well specifically, but if it's not on the list either, that means it's doing okay and it has some recent records,
Mhm.
or it might not be recognized as a distinct species. Do you happen to know anything about that bird off the top of your head, Alex?
I think it's a subspecies of Rufous throated, but I'm kind of hoping someone else in the chat is gonna gonna swoop in and save me. But I think it's a sub. I think both lists consider it a subspecies of Rufous throated, so it wouldn't be admitted to the list.